The funeral ended just after noon. The last handful of earth still clung to my shoes as I opened my phone and saw the email subject line, "Immediate termination, HR notification." At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. I had taken exactly 3 days off with prior written approval, 3 days to bury my father, 3 days to grieve the only man who ever believed I could lead. And this was how it ended. The message from my boss, Karen, was cold, clinical. While your absence was technically approved, your lack of responsiveness during a critical business window has left us no choice. We need employees who put work first. I didn't scream. I didn't reply. I just closed my laptop, wiped my face with the crumpled tissue from my purse, and stood up from the church pew. Sometimes, the silence is the strategy, because what Karen didn't know was I documented everything. And while she thought she was closing a chapter, I was already outlining my next move. What happens when the quietest person in the room gets pushed too far? Stay with me, because the ending surprised even me. I had been with the company for nearly 8 years. 8 years of late nights, working weekends, taking phone calls during dinner. 8 years of onboarding new hires, stepping in for people who no-showed, and making sure our clients stayed happy, even when the budget made it almost impossible. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't the star performer on paper, but I was steady. I was the one who held everything together when things started to fray. And my boss, Karen, she liked it that way, so long as I stayed in the background. Karen was the kind of manager who loved to optimize. Optimize staffing, optimize budgets, optimize morale, by which she meant cutting every corner and framing it as team empowerment. She never raised her voice, but her words cut deeper than anyone's temper ever could. She believed silence was compliance, and she rewarded the loudest, most visible team members, usually the ones with flashy charts and weekend texts full of buzzwords. I wasn't one of them. I believed in letting my work speak for itself, and for years, that was enough. Until Dad got sick. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in January. By April, he could barely walk. By May, he was gone. In the weeks leading up to his death, I still showed up every day. I didn't complain, didn't cry at my desk. I just worked, then drove an hour each way to sit beside him in the hospital, hold his hand while he slept, and whisper updates about things like quarterly forecasts and Karen's latest synergy sprint. When it became clear we were down to days, not weeks, I went to HR and submitted a formal time-off request, 3 days of bereavement leave. Clearly permitted in the employee handbook, Karen signed off. Her exact words were, "Take the time you need. We'll hold the fort." She even added a little smiley face to the email. I saved that. The funeral was on a Wednesday. I remembered the sun was too bright, too disrespectful. Somehow, for what we were going through, people I hadn't seen in years came up to hug me. I nodded, murmured thank yous. But I was moving through fog. My father was gone. He was the one who taught me how to stand tall even when I wanted to collapse. The one who once told me, "You don't need to scream to be strong. You just need to be clear." I had his watch in my coat pocket that day. I kept rubbing my thumb across its face, grounding myself with the rhythm of time ticking forward, no matter how much I wanted it to stop. When I opened that email from Karen the next morning, still wearing my funeral dress, I didn't feel anger. Not yet. I felt displaced, like I'd been erased while I was grieving, like none of those 8 years mattered, like I'd been removed from the narrative entirely. Her message was brief, no room for discussion, and worse, no acknowledgement of the loss I'd just endured. It was as if the last few days hadn't happened at all. My first instinct was to explain myself, to write a detailed response, to forward her the approval email, to CC HR, maybe legal. But then I thought of my dad, of how he always said, "Never argue with someone who's decided who you are. Just show them who they underestimated." So I didn't write back. I didn't beg for fairness. I just printed the email, slid it into a file folder with the original approval. Then I packed up my desk. one drawer at a time. My coworkers didn't know what to say. Sasha, who sat next to me, gave me a silent hug. Jordan from marketing asked if I was going freelance. No one mentioned Karen, but everyone felt it. The shift, the hush, the fear that if it could happen to me, they might be next. As I walked out, I glanced one last time at the break room whiteboard, the one I'd kept updated with birthdays, milestones, funny quotes. No one had erased my message from last week. Team, remember to take a breath. Life isn't always a deliverable. I smiled, bittersweet, and walked out. They thought they were writing my final chapter, but they forgot. Every woman they try to silence ends up rewriting the story. It took 2 days for the grief to settle into something sharper. Not rage, no. That would have been easy. What I felt was colder, more surgical. A need to understand why someone who looked me in the eye and approved my time off would then turn around and gut me without hesitation. So I started pulling threads. First stop, my email archive. I dug up every correspondence I'd ever had with Karen, especially around time off, approvals, performance reviews. I flagged anything that smelled off. There it was, an email dated 1 month prior to my father's passing, titled, Team Restructure Forecast, Q3. At the time, I hadn't paid much attention. I was tired, distracted by hospital visits. But now, reading closely, one bullet point hit me like a freight train. Evaluate potential salary displacement by Q3. Consider removing legacy mid-managers for leaner hires. Legacy, mid-manager. That was me. She'd planned this. She approved my time off knowing she'd fire me when I returned, and she waited until I was at my most emotionally vulnerable to strike. I kept digging. Through whispers from old colleagues and some quiet LinkedIn updates, I found out she had already offered my position, the one I'd spent years shaping, to someone else. A younger candidate, cheaper, less experienced, and worse, that person had started orientation the Monday of my father's funeral. So let's be clear. She hadn't fired me for not putting work first. She had used my grief as the perfect window to execute a premeditated plan. Clean, quiet, strategic, if you could call it that. And now she was betting I'd crawl away. Too exhausted to fight. But I wasn't interested in fighting. I was interested in precision. First, I spoke with an employment attorney, someone recommended by a former coworker who'd had her own run-in with Karen. He read through my folder of documentation, time off approval, performance reviews, the restructuring memo, and nodded slowly. She's violated labor protections, bereavement leave, wrongful termination under duress, possible age or salary discrimination depending on how she pitched the replacement. But he also said something else. You could take her to court, or you could play the long game and let me introduce you to someone at corporate. So, that's what I did. The next week, I had a phone call with Monica Reynolds, Regional Director of Talent Strategy. She'd worked with me years ago on a training initiative and had always been fair, even warm, in her corporate way. I told her everything. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't dramatic. I laid out the facts like a deck of cards. One by one, she was silent for a moment. Then she said, "She fired you the week of your father's funeral?" "Yes, with prior approval documented." "And replaced you within 48 hours? "Yes, without internal posting or interview." A long sigh. "I'm going to look into this, privately. Don't talk to anyone else yet." Over the next 3 days, I heard nothing. Then, on Friday morning, I got a call from an unknown number. I picked up, a familiar voice. "Hi, it's Karen." I froze. She sounded nervous, tight. "I understand Monica's been in touch. Look, I think there's been some miscommunication. I'd really love the opportunity to discuss this directly. Just you and me. Off the record." Off the record. Interesting phrase. Coming from someone who had documented my dismissal like a quarterly expense. I stayed calm. "Karen, I appreciate the call, but I'd prefer any future communication be in writing." Click. She hung up. 1 hour later, an email landed in my inbox from corporate HR. Subject, reinstatement and resolution options. Private and confidential. They were offering me a choice. Return to the company at a senior advisory role, higher pay, flexible schedule, direct reporting to Monica, decline reinstatement, but accept a settlement including 6-month severance, full benefits, and a formal letter of recommendation for any future role. I sat with it. This was the moment people imagine themselves dancing in. The victory, the leverage, the power shift. But all I felt was clarity. I wrote back one line. Option 2. With one addendum, I'd like a written acknowledgement that the termination violated bereavement protections. They agreed. And just like that, I wasn't reinstated. I was released on my terms. They thought I'd go quietly. Instead, I went powerfully, without even raising my voice. A week after signing the settlement, I thought that would be the end of it. But when you disrupt someone's illusion of control, especially someone like Karen, they rarely go quietly. The real storm hadn't even started yet. 3 days later, I got a message from Sasha, my old coworker from marketing. Hey, saw your name pop up in a meeting today. Something weird's going on. That same afternoon, a recruiter I'd casually been chatting with sent me a polite, oddly formal email. After speaking with a reference from your previous employer, we've decided not to move forward. Wait, what? I followed up. Of course, and with some careful questions. I learned the reference they'd spoken to wasn't Monica, it was Karen. Despite having signed a legal agreement, she was still interfering, still trying to stain my name, to keep me from landing anywhere else. That wasn't just petty, that was breach of settlement. I forwarded everything to my attorney. He didn't waste a minute. Within hours, a cease and desist letter was drafted and sent directly to Karen and corporate legal. It outlined the violation of our agreement in clear, calm terms, and warned that the next step would be litigation for defamation and retaliatory misconduct. I'll never forget the reply from corporate counsel the next day. We are deeply concerned by this behavior. Please be assured we are taking immediate corrective action. Immediate corrective action. It sounded like HR speak, but I knew what it meant. Karen had gone too far. By the end of that week, word started to spread internally, quietly, but powerfully. Karen had been placed on indefinite leave pending investigation. The corporate Slack thread lit up like a Christmas tree with vague emojis and cryptic reactions. People noticed her calendar access was revoked, her name removed from client accounts. And then, finally, it was official. A company-wide announcement went out. Karen was no longer with the company. We thank her for her service and wish her well in future endeavors. They always end it the same way. But this time, everyone knew the truth. Still, I hadn't spoken publicly about it. I didn't post on LinkedIn, didn't throw shade or write a tell-all tweet. Instead, I quietly reconnected with Sasha and Jordan and the 4 or 5 other people who had reached out during the chaos. We started something. It began as a private Slack group, just a safe place to vent, ask questions, share job leads, but it grew quickly. We named it the Quiet Comeback. It wasn't about revenge, it was about refusal. Refusal to let people like Karen define what professionalism looks like. Refusal to believe that kindness equals weakness. And refusal to let grief become a liability. A few weeks later, Monica invited me to speak at an internal leadership summit. She wanted me to share my experience, not just the fallout, but the framework, how companies could prevent what happened to me from ever happening again. At first, I hesitated. But then I remembered all the women, especially older women, who told me versions of this same story over the years. I stepped out for a funeral. I came back, and my role was gone. They called me emotional because I cried during a meeting the week my mom died. I used PTO to grieve, and they still punished me. It wasn't just my story, so I said yes. I stood on that stage, in front of a room full of regional leaders, and said this: grief doesn't make us weak. It makes us more human. And any company that punishes humanity in favor of productivity isn't leading, it's losing. And for the first time, I saw heads nod, not out of politeness, but out of recognition. That talk led to more. Soon I was consulting for HR teams, writing quietly viral articles on emotional labor, workplace dignity, and burnout culture. Even guest speaking on a few podcasts, not to tell war stories, but to offer a new playbook, not a louder one, a wiser one. And that's when it happened. One of the recruiters who'd previously turned me down sent a message. "We've been following your work. We'd love to offer you a position, Director of Employee Advocacy and Culture." It came with a salary 40% higher than my old job, autonomy, remote flexibility, and, get this, an official bereavement policy I helped co-write. They tried to make me small, but I didn't just bounce back. I built something they couldn't erase. I didn't plan for my name to end up in industry newsletters, but after that summit speech, someone from the press reached out, a quiet little workplace blog, run by two former HR pros who now advocate for labor fairness. They asked if I'd be open to telling my story. Anonymously? At first, I said yes, because it was never just about me anymore. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning under the headline, "She was fired for grieving. Then she changed the rules." They didn't name the company. They didn't name Karen. But people put the pieces together faster than I expected. By lunch, I had over 200 DMs, former coworkers, strangers from LinkedIn, even someone who used to work under Karen at a previous job, who said, "She did the same thing to me 5 years ago. I just didn't have the strength to fight it then. But thank you for doing what I couldn't." That message hit me, not because I needed to be thanked, but because I realized how many of us walk around with invisible bruises from leaders who think power means cruelty. And because this wasn't just my victory anymore, this was collective closure. Then, the twist. Corporate reached out again, this time not through HR, not through lawyers, but directly from a VP of Culture and Strategy. She wanted to meet in person, over coffee in a quiet downtown cafe. She said, "We failed, not just in how we handled your exit, but in how we empowered someone like Karen to lead unchecked for years." I didn't say anything. She continued, "We'd like to bring you in as a formal consultant, help us audit our internal review systems, build real accountability structures, name your price." I sipped my coffee. Let the silence speak for me. "Also," she added softly, "we're rebuilding our Women in Leadership initiative, and we'd be honored if you'd join as co-chair." I won't lie, part of me wanted to say no, not out of pettiness, but out of principle. Yet the truth was, if I could shape policies that protected the next woman who found herself in my shoes, if I could turn my worst professional moment into a lasting legacy, then maybe it was worth stepping back into the lion's den. But this time, on my terms. I accepted with conditions, a written commitment to reevaluating all past terminations from the last 5 years under Karen's tenure, mandatory manager training on grief literacy and emotional intelligence, annual reporting on internal grievances with a review committee that included outside eyes. They said yes, all of it. And one more thing, that new Director of Employee Advocacy role I'd been offered earlier, I asked if they'd consider someone I mentored in my previous department, Sasha. She got the job. Watching her step into that position, smiling with earned pride, was better than any revenge I could have imagined. The lack KO wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was surgical, precise, quietly seismic. Karen lost her career. The company got a reckoning. And I got what mattered most. Not my old job back, but the power to ensure no one else would be treated the way I was. And the best part? A year after it all, I got a letter. A real letter. Stamped. Handwritten. It was from Monica. Inside was a note and a single sentence. "Thank you for reminding us what leadership really looks like. Justice isn't always served in courtrooms. Sometimes it's served in quiet rooms, through patient hands and long games. And trust me, those victories last longer. It's funny how the worst day of your career can also become the seed of your greatest transformation. Looking back now, I don't see that email from Karen as a moment of failure. I see it as the moment I stepped out of the role I was assigned and into the power I had quietly built all along. Because the truth is, I didn't just lose a job. I lost a piece of myself. And in the process of reclaiming my dignity, I had to rebuild what that self even looked like. For months after, I kept hearing the same phrase from people. You handled that with so much grace. But grace, I've learned, is not the absence of fury. It's the choice to turn fury into something useful. It's knowing you could scorch the earth, but choosing instead to plant new things in it. That's what I did. I turned my silence into systems. I turned my grief into guidelines, and I turned my betrayal into a blueprint for change. Now, every time someone reaches out, whether it's a burnout manager, a grieving employee, or a woman who just walked out of a meeting feeling erased, I say the same thing. You are not difficult. You are not disposable. You are not the problem for needing time to heal. The problem is a system that punishes empathy while rewarding exhaustion. But the good news, systems are made by people, and that means people like us, can unmake them. 2. One day, I walked past my old office building. I wasn't there for work, just grabbing coffee nearby, but I stopped across the street and looked up at the windows, and I smiled. Not because I missed it, not because I wished things had gone differently, but because I realized I didn't lose my voice there. I reclaimed it somewhere far louder. And if you've ever been made to feel small, if you've ever been told you were too emotional, too slow, or too human for the job, let me tell you this. You are allowed to grieve and be powerful. You are allowed to fall and rebuild stronger. And you are allowed to walk away from places that only saw your productivity, but never your personhood. I didn't win by yelling. I didn't win by plotting revenge. I won by knowing my worth, documenting the truth, and choosing patience over panic. And in the end, the company changed. The policy changed. I changed. They fired me for taking time to grieve. And I turned that moment into a movement. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been told to shrink, stay quiet, or just move on when something unjust happened to you, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below and tell me your moment of silent strength. Hit subscribe if you want more stories of quiet justice, emotional resilience, and power redefined. And share this with someone who's been made to feel like their voice doesn't matter. Because trust me, it does. And sometimes, that voice becomes the one that rewrites the rules.